Hello. Welcome to day 5 of the 31 days of Halloween. 31 scary/spooky stories in 31 days. Today's story is entitled The Stain That Won't Wash Away. Richard's quest to cleanse a cursed stain pulls him into darkness. Some evils refuse to be washed away. And now, without further ado, here's story number 2. Also, just to be transparent, these 31 stories in 31 days are only possible because of AI, with my human involvement overseeing it.
Chapter 1: The Stubborn Blemish. The light from my bedroom window settled directly onto my favorite suit, bringing a pang of anxiety to my heart. Tonight was meant to be perfect. I had that significant event, one that could determine the course of my career. Everything had to be just right, especially my appearance. Drawing closer, I noticed a peculiar stain on the lapel, dark and irregular, marring the suit's elegance. Frowning, I tried to recall when and how I could have gotten there, but nothing came to mind. It seemed absurd. This suit was always handled with utmost care. Determined, I dabbed at it with water, then soap, and even tried some of the specialty stain removers I kept under the sink for emergencies like these. But the more I tried to clean it, the more obstinate it seemed to become. Panic began to set in. I had planned everything to the minute, and this was the last thing I needed. I remembered hearing about a laundromat downtown. Old, a bit run down, but apparently they had a way with stains that seemed miraculous. It might have been just neighborhood talk, but I was desperate. I had to try. Rushing, I grabbed the suit, slipped into a jacket, and dashed out of my apartment. The cool autumn air was a slap against my anxious warmth. As I drove, the streets seemed more desolate than usual, the fading sunlight casting long shadows. The thoughts racing through my mind revolved around that damnable stain and the event's impending importance. Pulling up in front of the laundromat, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. It looked even older than I'd imagined, with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered sporadically. A sense of unease settled in my stomach, but I shook it off, reminding myself of the urgency. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping into what I hoped would be the solution to my problem. Chapter 2: The Old Laundromat. The faint hum of old washing machines reached my ears as I stepped into the dimly lit laundromat. The place smelled of stale detergent and something else, a sort of mustiness that I couldn't place. Rows of aging washers and dryers lined the walls, their metal surfaces dulled by time. A ceiling fan creaked overhead. As I looked around, an old woman emerged from behind a curtain in the back. Her skin was pale and lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and alert. They fixed on me with an intensity that I wasn't expecting. "I've got this stain," I began, holding out the suit, feeling oddly self-conscious under her gaze. "I've tried everything to get it out. Can you help?" She took the suit from me, inspecting the stain closely. There was a long, silent pause. I shifted uneasily, wondering if I'd made a mistake coming here.
"Some stains,"
she murmured.
"are more than just spills or dirt."
I frowned. "I just need it cleaned." She nodded slowly, almost reluctantly.
"I will try. But remember, some stains are not meant to be washed away."
Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and placed my suit into a washer. As the machine whirred to life, I watched the window, expecting to see the stain fading. But instead, to my horror, it seemed to grow larger, darker. I could swear it pulsed like a heartbeat.
The bell above the door tinkled, alerting me to a new customer. From behind the curtain, I could tell he was young and in a hurry. When I emerged and saw the suit in his hand, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I recognized that stain. I'd seen its kind before. He looked desperate, speaking about the stain in a rushed tone. As I took the suit from him, memories of the last time I encountered such a mark flooded back. The outcome hadn't been good. The stain was like a window to a dark past, holding a story of its own. Yet, I couldn't just turn him away. Maybe, just maybe, I thought, this time would be different. Some stains are more than just spills or dirt. I warned him, hoping he'd sense my apprehension.
I just need it cleaned.
He replied, clearly not grasping the gravity of the situation. Reluctantly, I placed the suit into a washer. I hoped my old machines could work their magic. But as the water swirled, the stain grew. I'd feared as much. It wasn't just a mark on fabric, it was a darkness that had chosen to manifest. The young man's gasp of horror confirmed what I already knew. We were dealing with something far more sinister than a mere stain.
Chapter 3: The Curse Awakens. The laundromat's timer dinged, snapping me back to reality. I hesitated for a moment, dreading the state of my suit. With a deep breath, I approached the washer, hoping against hope that the stain had miraculously vanished. Instead, the blemish seemed even more pronounced, as if it had absorbed the very darkness around it. Swallowing hard, I reached out to grab the suit. But the moment my fingers brushed the stain, a chilling coldness gripped them. Pulling back in alarm, I watched, stunned, as my hand grew paler, the cold sensation creeping up my arm like icy tendrils. Panic set in. My heart raced as I clutched my arm, trying to rub some warmth back into it. My mind raced. What was happening? This was more than just a stubborn mark. Something was profoundly wrong. With wide eyes, I turned to Mrs. Haversham, seeking answers. She stared back, an enigmatic look on her face that held a mix of sympathy and fear. "What have you done?" I demanded, my voice trembling.
The boy's alarm was palpable. I saw his fingers touch the stain, and I knew immediately the darkness was claiming him. The cold pallor that started taking over his hand was all too familiar, a sight I'd hoped never to witness again. He turned to me, his eyes filled with confusion and fear.
"What have you done?"
He accused, his voice tinged with panic. I sighed, knowing it was time to reveal the heavy truth. "It's not what I've done, young man," I began, choosing my words carefully. "It's what that stain represents." His bewilderment was evident, so I continued, "That stain, it's not just any stain. It's a curse. Over my many years, I've come across such marks a few times. They appear on items that have borne witness to traumatic events, trapping the dark energy of those moments." Richard looked like he was struggling to process my words. I couldn't blame him. It was a lot to take in. I didn't believe it at first either, I added softly, until I saw the effects firsthand. "We need to find a way to break its hold on you." His eyes, still filled with a mix of disbelief and terror, met mine. I could see he was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation.
Chapter 4: The Origins. Inside the dimly lit confines of the laundromat, Mrs. Haversham's voice seemed to echo with a tone of deep gravity. She told Richard about the origins of the cursed suit. It once belonged to a man named Elias Thorne, who dabbled in forbidden arts and dark rituals.
Elias was consumed by his lust for power and invoked entities beyond comprehension.
Mrs. Haversham intoned.
He attempted a ritual of great consequence, but it went awry. The resulting darkness manifested as the stain you now see.
As Richard absorbed this unsettling information, the ambient lights of the laundromat flickered. The cursed energy resonated with the tale being told. Richard's face contorted in pain as haunting images flashed before his eyes, cloaked figures, unspeakable rituals, and the piercing eyes of Elias Thorne, beckoning him. The malevolent force of the stain seemed eager to find a new host in Richard, to use him to finish what Elias had started.
Mrs. Haversham's voice washed over me, revealing a tale that seemed more like a horror movie script than reality. I tried to keep up, to grasp the importance of what she was saying, but my mind kept reeling. A dark ritual? Elias Thorne? It all sounded too surreal. As she spoke, a shiver ran down my spine. The atmosphere around me seemed to change. The laundromat's walls felt like they were closing in. Suddenly, haunting visions flashed before me. Shadows dancing around a fire, grotesque symbols drawn in blood, and a pair of eyes that seemed eerily familiar. It was Elias. I felt an overwhelming connection, as though I was being pulled into the memories. I could feel the rush of the dark energy, the raw power that Elias once wielded, and the void left when the ritual failed. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. The weight of the malevolence in the suit pressed down on me, threatening to consume me. The energy whispered promises of power and purpose if only I'd let it take control. I fought to remain grounded, to cling to the present moment. But with each passing second, it felt like I was losing myself to the darkness that Elias Thorne had once embraced. Chapter 5: Desperate Measures. Every day felt like a battle. The darkness that had anchored itself within me grew stronger, pulling me into its depths. I was desperate for a solution. I sought out spiritualists, each with their own incense-filled rooms and cryptic chants, promising liberation from the curse. Historians told me tales of the past, while scientists, with their skeptical eyes, tried to find a logical explanation for the inexplicable. In one dimly lit archive, my path crossed with Eliza's. She had a fiery determination in her eyes, a burning intensity that matched my own desperation. We were kindred spirits, brought together by a shared nightmare. She told me of her brother, taken from her by a similar darkness, a curse that left a void in her life. Together, we dove into ancient tomes and scripts. We were a team, her unwavering belief and strength a beacon of hope in my bleakest moments. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, we found a ritual, a counter to the consuming darkness. But it wasn't without its risks. The ritual required a balance, an exchange. One life forced to counteract another. There was a chance that I could lose myself entirely, or worse, that Eliza could be taken instead.
When I first saw Richard, there was a familiarity in his eyes, a haunted look I recognized all too well. My heart ached for him, knowing the torment he was experiencing. The loss of my brother was still fresh, the wound deep. I had vowed never to let another soul suffer the same fate. Working with Richard was like finding a piece of my lost self. We were both desperate, hungry for answers. Every dusty book we turned, every whispered spell we recited, brought us closer to a solution. When we stumbled upon the ritual, I felt a mix of elation and dread. I knew the price of dabbling in such forces. I had lost once, and the thought of losing again was unbearable. But Richard was suffering, and I was determined to help, no matter the cost. The weight of our discovery hung heavily between us. The ritual's price, the potential sacrifice, it was a burden we both had to bear. We faced a daunting decision. The road ahead was uncertain, but together, we had found hope in the darkest of times.
Chapter 6: The Final Cleansing. In the very laundromat where it all began, Richard, Eliza, and Mrs. Haversham gathered around the cursed suit. Ancient symbols were drawn on the floor, their edges illuminated by the soft glow of candles. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the weight of the impending ritual pressing down on them. With each word chanted, the room seemed to grow colder. The malevolent force within the suit, sensing the impending threat, fought back with a fury. Shadows danced erratically on the walls, their forms twisting and contorting in protest. Mrs. Haversham's voice wavered but did not falter, guiding Richard and Eliza through each step. The battle of wills raged on. As dawn's first light began to filter through the laundromat's grimy windows, there was a piercing scream, an outcry of defeat from the malevolence. And then, silence. The suit lay in the center of the now smudged symbols, the stain gone, but the fabric shredded, a testament to the intense struggle that had transpired. Exhausted but victorious, the trio shared a moment of profound relief. The curse, it seemed, had been vanquished.
The first breath of freedom was intoxicating, like a drowning man breaking the surface after what felt like an eternity underwater. Eliza, Mrs. Haversham, and I rejoiced, believing the unspeakable darkness was finally vanquished. Days morphed into nights, and the oppressive dread that had once consumed every waking moment started to fade, almost like a nightmarish legend from a past life. But true horror, I would soon realize, never truly departs, it merely lurks, waiting. It was on one of those deceptively peaceful nights when it began again. Preparing for bed, I reached for a shirt, the soft fabric slipping easily through my fingers. But as I began to button it, my fingers brushed against something cold, out of place. My heart plummeted into an abyss as I stared at the cuff. A stain. So familiar, so hauntingly reminiscent of the curse. A chill gripped me, colder and more terrifying than before. It felt like 1,000 whispered threats in the dark, an unseen hand grazing the back of my neck. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows more pronounced, more menacing. Desperation clawed at my insides. The thought of that darkness returning, of being dragged back into that terrifying void, was overwhelming. I could hear it, soft whispers, laughter just on the edge of hearing, the promise of unending torment. Every shadow in my room seemed to twist and writhe, as if mocking my brief moment of respite. It was a stark, chilling realization. The curse may have been dormant, but it was far from gone. And this time, it felt hungrier, more insidious, eager to reclaim its hold on me.
Leave your thoughts about the stain that won't wash away below. See you tomorrow for day 6 of the 31 days of Halloween scary/spooky stories.